Thank you very much. Just to correct you there, sorry, my name's Jack Skelly. That's all right, food analyst at I'm food analyst at Euromonitor International. Today I'm going to talk to you about juggling growth priorities in the chocolate confectionery market. I have to juggle some priorities here. We've got a tight deadline, and I've got a lot to get through, so I'll get cracking. Just a quick word about Euromonitor International. Euromonitor International is a global provider of strategic market intelligence. We have 12 regional offices worldwide, and we have 800 analysts in over 80 countries providing syndicated and custom research. Two things I'm going to talk to you about today. The first of those is I'm going to give you a brief overview of the chocolate confectionery market globally, and then I'm going to talk to you about what I perceive to be the juggling act for manufacturers who want to achieve success in the next few years, the different priorities that they have to balance. So let's look at some headline figures. I know you've seen a lot of those today. First of all, the chocolate confectionery market worldwide is worth around just over $101 billion this year in terms of retail sales. That's a huge market. That's roughly the size of the entire sales of packaged food in Germany or the UK. And you have a number of the leading manufacturers, food manufacturers operating in chocolate. The highest per capita in the world is perhaps unsurprisingly Switzerland, which has a huge $237 per capita. Now, one of the reasons for that is obviously Swiss chocolate is a tourist visit in itself, but also there's a very high consumption of chocolate in that country. Second and third highest per capita consumption is in the UK and Ireland with around $140, just to give you an idea of how huge the consumption is in Switzerland. And in terms of performance, if we look in retail sales over the last 5 years, we could see that sales have grown by a third in that 5-year time period. So that's a decent performance of between 6 and 7% each year. So there's some of the headline figures. Now let's look at things in a bit more detail. So here I've highlighted, these are the retail value sales of chocolate around the world, across 80 markets, and highlighted in the dark blue here are the biggest markets in the world, of value between $1.5 US billion to $18.3 billion. That is coincidentally the US, that's the biggest market worldwide. And the good news is that all of these markets in the last 5 years have experienced value sales growth. So they're making more money than they were 5 years ago. And if you want to be a successful chocolate manufacturer, you need to be present in at least one or two of those markets. So that's the good news. Now let's look at things slightly differently. So here we have the kilogram per capita consumption of chocolate in these markets. This is the percentage growth on average over the last 5 years. So we can see that in China and India, there's significant growth in the annual average growth in the last 5 years. So for example, in India, each person now eats 60 grams more chocolate than they did 5 years ago. That doesn't sound like much, but in a population the size of India, that's a huge amount. So we've seen good growth in those two countries, perhaps unsurprisingly. And in Australia and Brazil, we've also seen solid growth. However, if you look in Eastern Europe, Western Europe, and North America, the traditional strong markets, you can see that there's actually been a sizable decline in consumption. So in the US, for example, there's actually, the average person is eating 300 grams less of chocolate than they were 5 years ago, which is a huge amount. So how do we explain those woes in the developed markets? First of all, it's important to point out that there's already incredibly high consumption levels in those markets in Western Europe and North America. It's hard to get people to eat more chocolate than they already do. At the same time, there's increasing health awareness, so fat and sugar, which are typically perhaps associated with eating chocolate, they're being vilified in worldwide media. People are becoming more health conscious, and naturally chocolate is one of the first to go if you're prioritizing a healthy diet. So people in those markets are eating less chocolate. And there are more snack alternatives that are enjoying a lot of success. So we're seeing a number of snacks acting as substitutes for chocolate that really push their health credentials. And all this is resulting in sclerotic growth. Just to emphasize the point that I made a bit earlier about how values are increasing in developed markets, but volumes are decreasing, I should say. Here I've highlighted the average spend per capita in developed versus developing countries. That's the columns there. Just to point out how important developed countries are, they're nearly twice the size in per capita consumption than the leading developing countries. However, in terms of growth rates, so value growth over the last 5 years on average, you can see that developed countries are still growing. So again, just to emphasize that point, that values are increasing but volumes are decreasing. So that explains developed markets. Now let's change the picture a little bit. So here I've calculated the sales of what I determine to be not just chocolate but also the other snacks as well. So highlighted here in red is chocolate, and someone said earlier that chocolate is an everyday treat for people, and that is certainly true in Australasia, Eastern Europe and Western Europe. As you can see highlighted in red, it accounts for far more consumption of snacks than far more consumption than the likes of cakes, pastries and biscuits. However, it quite simply isn't an everyday treat in markets such as Latin America, such as Middle East Africa, and such as Asia Pacific, where between 10 and 15% of consumption on snacks goes to chocolate. Far more in Asia Pacific is consumed through pastries, cakes and biscuits. And there's two reasons for that. Well, there's multiple reasons for that, in fact. First of all, one of them is the sheer availability of chocolate is greatly reduced in those markets compared to Western Europe, compared to Australasia. And second of all, one of the most important things is the cost. So in Brazil, for example, chocolate costs roughly 3 to 5 times more than a biscuit, than a cake or a pastry. And that's simply in those markets where people earn less money than they do in Western Europe and North America. That is simply a classic case of affordability. So manufacturers face two different challenges if they want to succeed. In those markets where chocolate isn't the everyday treat that it is in Western Europe, they need to improve accessibility. They need to make chocolate more affordable, and they need to improve its visibility by pushing it into more stores. So they need to focus on volumes in that sense. However, in developed markets where the problem isn't that consumers aren't eating enough chocolate, but they're actually starting to eat less chocolate, manufacturers need to push value as a priority. And in the second half of this presentation, I want to go forward with this two-tier strategy. It's interesting. This is essentially the juggling act that I want to communicate to you guys. And this is all happening at a time when input costs are increasing. So I don't want to bore you too much with this graph because it might be burnt inside your eyelids now. You've seen this so many times today. So in the orange columns highlight the cocoa price per metric ton over the last 15 years. The light blue line shows you chocolate confectionery unit price growth over the last 15 years, and the dark blue line shows you the year-on-year growth of cocoa prices. So there's been a 51% increase in chocolate confectionery prices in the last 13 years, since 2002, and that sounds like a huge amount. However, if you compare that to the price of cocoa, which has increased by 82% in the last 13 years, and the price of palm oil, which has increased 70%, these are obviously, I'm sure you all understand, these are two of the key components that go into the manufacture of chocolate. The message is clear to see here that manufacturers are actually taking a hit due to the increase in cocoa prices and palm oil prices. It's becoming more expensive for them to make, but they're not raising unit prices at the same rate. And this is going to inform strategy. So here, let's take a bit more of a closer look at the affordability of chocolate. Here I've calculated the time taken in a number of different countries to earn enough money to buy 100 grams of chocolate. So I've calculated this using the average wage per hour of a worker in one of these markets, and then correlated this with the price of 100 grams of chocolate in those markets to figure out how long it takes to afford it. So in Germany and Japan, it's very affordable. It only takes 2 minutes in Germany to buy 100 grams of chocolate. And the average in developed markets is around 7 minutes. Now, this may explain why consumption of chocolate is so high in these regions, because quite simply, it only takes 7 minutes to buy some chocolate. It's not really going to be too much of a drag on your daily income to buy that much chocolate. However, in somewhere like China, where it takes half an hour to buy, or 31 minutes to buy 100 grams of chocolate, the average wage is only $4 an hour, you may think twice about it. So the price of chocolate in Asia Pacific on average is $2.15. Simply, it's not affordable, it's not justifiable to spend that much on chocolate when you don't earn that much money. And that may explain why consumption is so low in these markets. Indeed, in India, the average person per year spends only $1.50 on chocolate. India isn't featured in this map because it actually takes longer than an hour to have enough money to afford to buy 100 grams of chocolate. So affordability is really the key issue in these markets. So here are the two different ways that manufacturers can juggle or balance the two demands that they have. In developed markets, manufacturers can focus on premium chocolate, and there's several advantages to this. One of those is that in a market where, which is incredibly demanding, which is already incredibly accustomed to buying a high amount of chocolate, offering premium chocolate really offers something new to those consumers. So it stands out in the market. It also justifies higher price points. Consumers are more willing to buy chocolate less regularly, but pay more for it when they do. So premium chocolate really comes into its own here. And it achieves higher profit margins than other more mass brands. So a number of manufacturers have done this, have moved into this premium sector. In the US, you can see that Hershey has introduced Brookside, which is more premium than its typical Hershey brand. And in Australasia recently, Mondelez released Cocoa, pictured here, which has a sort of higher unit price than the standard dairy milk brand. Don't want to tread on anyone's toes here. I think Hershey and Mondelez typically don't go for the premium market, but they are doing now. And this just emphasizes how important premium chocolate is becoming to the leading manufacturers. And just to back this up with a few facts and figures, here on the right-hand side, I've highlighted the growth in the US chocolate confectionery market over the last 5 years in terms of percentage year-on-year growth. And you can see Ghirardelli, Lindt, and Ferrero Rocher, three of the what I'd call the more premium brands, they've all outperformed the more mass market brands such as M&M's, Reese's, and Hershey's. This is just the US, this is just one example, but it's broadly applicable to both most Western European markets and Australasia as well. So that explains how premium can be used in areas where there's high consumption of chocolate already. But in developing markets, we're seeing manufacturers create new price points. These are two really good examples from Mars. So the top one is a Galaxy RS that's available for 15 rupees in India. So 15 rupees, I believe, I'm not an exchange rate boffin, but I believe that's around 20 cents. The Twix top available in Saudi Arabia, that's available for 1 Saudi Real. That costs between 25 and 30 cents. Now to compare that to the average Twix in Saudi Arabia, that's 2 to 3 times cheaper than the average Twix, and the same applies to Galaxy in India. It's 2 to 3 times cheaper than the normal Galaxy in that country. So this is one way of improving accessibility, lowering price points, getting more consumers simply to buy any sort of chocolate, no matter how little it costs for them. It's going to create more loyalty. Another way of doing that is through improving accessibility is through greater distribution in terms of this can take two forms. First of all, by moving into more local convenience stores such as Kiranas in India, increasing availability there, but also in terms of cities. So a number of the leading chocolate manufacturers such as Hershey's and Mars are targeting what they describe as tier 2 and tier 3 cities in China and India. And another way of doing it is through cross-branding. So in that regional map I showed earlier, you could see that biscuits are more popular in Asia Pacific. This is informing strategic decision-making in the leading manufacturers. So Mondelez, for example, last year bought Kinh Do, which is the leading biscuit manufacturer in Vietnam. And you could easily imagine that it can get consumers more used to buying chocolate or getting used to its brands by cross-branding it with the leading biscuit brands. So here is the juggling act in a nutshell. In developed markets, you need to focus short-term on achieving value gains, and one of the best ways of doing this is through offering premium products. In developing markets, it's going to be much more of a long-term challenge for manufacturers. Not only is there more cultural affability, I would say, towards biscuits, cakes, and pastries, but it simply isn't. Chocolate simply isn't affordable in these markets, and that isn't going to change overnight. So manufacturers need to focus on developing a more widespread strategy, making it more available and at better prices or more suitable prices for those consumers. So that's me done. Thank you very much for listening.